And for more on this ruling, I want to bring in California Congressman and House Budget Committee member Tom McClintock. Congressman, thanks so much for your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What's your reaction to Nancy Pelosi there? She says that this ruling is a subversion of the will of the American people.
Don't forget, she sold Obamacare with the promise, if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. Those were Obama's words himself. It was going to open up a wide range of choices for consumers. It was going to save us thousands and thousands of dollars per family off of our health care costs. Instead, it did exactly the opposite. People have no choice but to take a one-size-fits-all plan. A older couple is required to pay for full pediatric care. It's forced the cost of health care up dramatically. So anything that revisits that issue is a good thing. Congress failed to repeal and replace it, as many of us had promised. That's on us. That was a terrible failure of the Congress, but maybe this will now cause the issue to be revisited.
So is there a sense among your colleagues over on the Hill that a district court judge is now doing the job that Republicans on the Hill should have done for the American people?
Well, don't forget the original Roberts case that upheld Obamacare said Congress has absolutely no authority to impose this plan, except if it's enforced with a tax rather than a fine. Well, then it's okay. Well, that's a distinction without a difference and a very dangerous precedent, because what it says is, even though Congress has no authority to mandate people to do things like this, as long as it uses a tax rather than a fine, its power is absolute and infinite. That's a terrible case. It turns due process on its head. If it's enforced by a tax rather than a fine, the burden of proof is on you to prove that you are innocent, and you have to pay the penalty before you even get a day in court. Punishment first, verdict after. That's a terrible precedent. And again, if this gets it back up to the Supreme Court and causes John Roberts to review his very bad reasoning in the original decision, that would be a very good thing for the Constitution, for the American people, and for health care consumers.
But if it does make it all, if the ruling makes it all the way back up the food chain, this goes to the Supreme Court again. If the Supreme Court strikes down Obamacare, what is the plan?
Well,
the American people have yet to see a plan from the Republicans.
Well, no, the plan was outlined many years ago by Republicans. Unfortunately, we failed to enact it. And that plan provided for the widest range of choices available to people and a supportive tax system to assure that a basic plan was in the reach of every family. And we provided a provision for a pooled risk insurance fund to support those that have pre-existing conditions.
I want to switch tacks because I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about this pending government shutdown coming our way in just 6 days. President Trump says he wants to shut down the government if he doesn't get the funding for his wall. Can you explain to us why this is something the president supports? It seems obvious that the only way to guarantee the president doesn't get additional funding for his wall is if the government shuts down.
Well, first of all, the president doesn't shut down the government. The government shuts down if the Congress fails to pass a spending bill to keep the government open.
But he can certainly goad
That's the
members
responsibility of the House and the Senate. If he were to veto such a bill, then he would be. But otherwise, right now, a dollar doesn't get spent by this government unless the Congress says it gets spent. So that is in the Congress's court right now. But it ought to be a no-brainer. In fact, the House passed several bills over the years to authorize the construction of a wall, both during the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. When you look at the mass of illegal immigrants who are camped out at the southern border right now trying to cross the border by mob action, you realize how important a wall is, not just to protect law enforcement that are putting their lives on the line to protect our borders, but also to protect the lawbreakers whose actions would otherwise force a confrontation.
But Congressman, isn't DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, one of the agencies that would be negatively impacted by a government shutdown? How can we ask them to protect the border?
Actually, not much, because, again, those are considered essential services, and those will continue whether or not an appropriations bill is signed. In fact, about 3/4 of the federal government will be funded throughout this so-called shutdown if it occurs.
But it will be impacted.
The effects would be limited. but the necessity of constructing a border wall ought to be clear to everybody who's, again, watching. Essentially, wide open borders, which, and if that's the case, then we're no longer a country. We're just a vast territory between Mexico and Canada, both of which, by the way, have borders and immigration laws that they enforce.
Congressman, thanks for sharing your perspective with us today. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.